So at the time of the end, the Bible tells us that an iron-like totalitarian style of government will be more dominant or gain ascendancy over the clay-like democratic style of government. So rather than the will of the people ruling things, it's more going to be more like a totalitarian style of government that is ruthless. And that's parallel with what we read in Daniel 7, where the fourth beast will resurge to exercise dominion over the nations. So tonight we want to look at some examples of what's going on in the world today and how iron-like powers, those seeking total control over the nations, are progressively increasing their control. And it's actually making life more difficult for us. And keep in mind that that's what governments have done throughout history. They have made life very difficult for the saints. In Australia, we're relatively comfortable, but historically it hasn't always been the case for our brethren and sisters throughout history. And it's certainly not the case for our brethren in other parts of the world, including Pakistan. So nevertheless, so what we're going to have a look at is some examples of, the closer we get to Christ's return, the more difficult it will be. And governments increase their power by injecting fear into the population. But the exhortation for us is that we need to overcome this fear with a strong faith, okay? Amidst all the noise that we're being bombarded with via the media and the internet, like waves crashing on a shore, we should have the inner peace because we have the wonderful hope of Christ's soon return. Whatever happens to us in this life, whatever happens in the world around us is only transitory. It's only temporary. While the world around us is full of dismay, perplexity, fear, worry about what's going on, we need to lift up our heads as we know that the time of our redemption is very close. Okay, so a brief review of what we read in Daniel chapter 2. We know that the four main metals of what the image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed referred to the four major empires of the world: Babylon, followed by Media, Persia, Greece, then Rome. And then if we look at the Roman Empire, there's several stages of the Roman Empire. First of all, there's a pagan Roman Empire, which lasted from BC 67 to AD 476. Then it became divided, didn't it? After the Roman Empire fell, it divided into the states of Europe, but then it became the Holy Roman Empire, with the Catholic, particularly the Catholic power, being that strong iron element all throughout Europe, exercising dictatorial control over the from AD 529 to 1806, so through what we refer to as the Dark Ages commonly. But then post the French Revolution, forward and really from AD 20 till our day and up until Armageddon, the feet part of the image refers to a divided alliance of nations, okay, where you've still got elements of the clay and elements of the iron mixing together. And then finally, you have the reunited Holy Roman Empire post-Armageddon, which will be destroyed by Christ and the saints. And on the divided alliance of nations, which is our day, Revelation 16 tells us there's three particular iron-like powers seeking to exercise dominance. That's the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And particularly tonight, we'll focus on what the beast is doing. Now, just reviewing what we read in Daniel chapter 2, how the feet and the clay are described the iron and the clay and the feet are described. Well, iron refers to a harsh monarch totalitarian style of government, like all the four empires which are portrayed as beasts in Daniel chapter 7. To be mixed with soft clay implies a more benevolent style of government reflecting the will of the people. The clay's earth, people, right? And Daniel says that, it's partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It shall be a divided kingdom. So they will never become one country like it was before, one entire empire with one set of laws governing everyone, but nevertheless, they can align. And then he goes to say in verse 41 still that some of the firmness of the iron shall be in it. So the iron, which in Daniel 7 is the fourth beast, will always seek to exert influence or control over the territories of the divided kingdom. And so in verse 42 goes on to say that as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. So some aspects of the government or countries will be totalitarian, more dictatorial-like, but other aspects of the government of certain countries will be more democratic. It will be this mix. And that's what verse 43 says, as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. So there will always be friction between those desiring iron-like totalitarian power and the clay-like common people. Now, so this part of the image, the feet being iron and clay, describes Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, it's separated into several different nations. Some say approximately 10, which would equate to the 10 toes. But the iron remains throughout it, particularly the papacy, and that power was often suppressing the people of the clay. It also aptly describes the state of Europe and most nations globally since the French Revolution, when the voice of the people, liberty, equality, and fraternity, has become part of most governments, and that form of government limits the extent of what the iron-like powers can do. And also, I think it remains an apt description of the political situation of most nations today. And firstly, it's true regarding the 27 countries of Europe that united in 1993 to form the European Union. Ever since, their union has been fragile, with friction between the strong and the weak nations. For example, Germany as a strong nation and Greece as a weak nation. And there's also friction in that the European leaders and organisations have constantly sought to impose their iron-like policies on the clay-like common people. But they continue to resist with a democratic cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And it's not just in Europe. This friction between the iron-like leaders and the clay-like masses is characteristic of most nations today. However, progressively we are witnessing the iron-like powers gaining the upper hand over the clay in governing in the government of different nations. Now, the clay will always be there and there will always be friction, but the influence of the soft clay is these days being severely limited. Now, it's interesting to note from Daniel 2 that when the image is struck by the stone, when the stone, which represents Christ and the saints, strikes the image, all parts of the image are broken together. It's not just the iron that's consumed, or the feet of iron and clay that's destroyed. Now, it's all of it together. So in verse 35, for example, then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together. So this implies that the image is standing and it's fully erect, okay? And what is destroyed is not just the final iron and clay phase, but everything that the image represents, which is the kingdoms of men, and really that a totalitarian style of government, which is opposed to God and seeking its will over the people, exerting its will over the people. And this is confirmed in verse 44, when it refers to the explanation about the stone returning and striking the image means that the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. But it shall break and consume not just the last kingdom, but all of these kingdoms, okay? From the gold, the silver, the brass, and the iron, they're all going to be consumed. So the final phase, okay, that's going to exist before Christ returns is the image stands up, and everything that was represented by these beastly empires will be in control again. So verse 45 says, for as much as thou sawest the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, all of it was broken, okay, together. So that's what it's telling us. It's telling us that the image will be standing, okay, and what will be destroyed will be what all of the kingdoms of men since Babylon represented, okay, a style of government that is anti-God, that seeks to dominate the people based on fleshly, diabolical principles. So Daniel saw the whole image standing before it was broken to pieces, not just the iron and the clay, but all of it. So this suggests that before the stone, which is Christ and the saints, smites the image, then those who control the kingdoms of men will effectively control the territories of all previous four empires and will exert absolute control over the nations like the four previous empires. And so we can expect that the iron-like powers today will progressively gain ascendancy over the clay and impose their dominion over the nations. So that's Daniel 2. Now we know Daniel chapter 7 is parallel with Daniel 2 from a prophecy interpretation point of view. In Daniel chapter 2 we have four metals. In Daniel chapter 7 we have four beasts. Daniel chapter 2, really the four metals describes the kingdoms of men from man's perspective. Okay, great and powerful and brilliant. But Daniel chapter 7 describes the kingdoms of men from God's perspective as ugly, ruthless beasts. And so we have the four beasts, the lion for Babylon, the Medo-Persian like a bear, Greece was like a leopard, and the fourth beast was dreadful and terrible, okay, and having iron teeth, which parallels the iron legs in Daniel chapter 2. And so the four beasts, they're portrayed as ferocious beasts, okay, because that conveys a ruthless totalitarian style of government with little regard to the common people. Now, when we read Daniel chapter 7, there's no parallel in a sense with the clay there, right? But what we're told is that the fourth beast continues to the end. So there's no fifth beast in Daniel chapter 7. It's the fourth beast, the Roman, still exists when Christ comes. And this persecutes the saints. This power continues to persecute the saints and continues to prosper until the end. And I believe in our day, this is what Daniel 2 is saying in the feet of the image, that the firmness of iron shall be in it. That's the fourth beast there. Okay, so although it's had to get on along with the clay, nevertheless, okay, that beast is still there. That firmness of the iron is still trying its best to exert its power over the clay. And from time to time, it has. Okay, certainly during the Dark Ages, with the ascendancy of the papacy, the iron-like power then was totally dominant over the clay. Since the French Revolution, it hasn't been the case, but it's likely to come back again. And the fourth beast will be destroyed by the Son of Man. Okay, that's what Daniel chapter 7 says. Okay, it's the fourth beast that will be destroyed by a Son of Man, which is Christ and the clouds of heaven and the saints. And also that the 10 horns upon the beast, including the little horn, will also be destroyed by Christ and the saints. So all aspects, okay, of this beast will be destroyed by Christ and the saints. Now, in the book of Revelation, we have different phases of Daniel's fourth beast. In Revelation chapter 12, we have the pagan Roman Empire. It's described as a great red dragon. In Revelation 13, it's the Holy Roman Empire, where we have the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. And then in Revelation 16, which is the period we're in, which is the divided alliance of nations, we have the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So 3 different aspects, 3 different iron-like powers. And then finally in Revelation 17 to 19, after Armageddon, we have the reunited Holy Roman Empire with the woman riding on the beast. Okay, but today, this is the stage we're living in, okay, where we have a divided alliance of nations, but nevertheless, we have 3 iron-like powers trying to obtain ascendancy over the common people, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Of course, this is taken from Revelation chapter 12, the 6th vial. Okay, so verse 13, I saw 3 unclean spirits that looked like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So it's important to note that the unclean spirits that look like frogs are coming out of the mouth of the dragon. Okay, they're projecting it. The dragon, the beast, and the false prophet are projecting this, what verse 14 effectively is describes as a lying, deceptive message designed to appeal, okay, to the clay. They are the spirits of demons performing signs who go out to the kings of the earth. And the end result is it's going to bring them together for the battle that would take place on the great day of God, the all-powerful, okay, which is verse 16 described. These spirits gathered, okay, these unclean spirits, the effect is to gather all nations, okay, the kings and their armies, to the place that is called Armageddon, where they will be judged, as we know, by God when Christ returns. So just to summarize this, or to put this more succinctly, so out of 3 iron-like powers desiring total control, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, we have unclean spirit-like frogs, or spirits of demons working miracles, which is a lying message designed to deceive the clay-like masses. Okay, frogs is associated with the flesh, and it's associated with the plague, one of the plagues in Egypt where Pharaoh lied. Okay, so it's a lying message designed to appeal to the flesh, to fleshly instincts of the clay-like masses. And they're able to work miracles, and I'll comment on that a bit later. And this impacts all the kings of the earth and their citizens, such that it brings them together for the battle that will take place on the great day of God Almighty. Now, here's my summary of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Tonight, we're only going to focus on the beast. Okay, but the dragon represents the diabolos in political manifestation, okay, which is the rulers of this world who rule according to the flesh. And note that the dragon still exists, okay, during the millennial age. So you can't pinpoint the dragon down to one particular power, okay, because it's still going to exist. Wherever human flesh is empowered, okay, with the ability to muster an army and fight, that's the dragon. And then you have the beast, and you also have the beast, which is centered in Europe, and it is represented today by the Economic Union and all the organizations that seek global control that are based in Europe, including the IMF, the BIS, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, World Trade Organization. They're all trying to control, the order of nations and the masses, and the false prophet. So out of these 3 iron-like powers comes a corrupting message of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And they do this by controlling the media. That's their main mouth, okay? To convey this message out of their mouth, they control the media, they control the legal systems, they control the science, what's allowed to be called science. They control the politicians, okay, to forward their agenda. But it's a lying, clay-like, corrupting message and it impacts all the kingdoms of the earth and their citizens. Okay, so let's review what we've learnt so far about the time of the end. Daniel 2 has told us that the whole image is portrayed standing on its feet. So the iron must gain ascendancy over the clay to stand, and that's consistent with the other metals of the whole image, which will be standing. Also in Daniel 2, we were told that all parts of the image, what is represented by the 4 previous empires, will be broken in pieces at the same time, together. The stone, which is Jesus Christ returning with the saints, consumes all of these kingdoms at the same time. So the style of the 4 empires was ruthless totalitarian control. That's what Christ will face when he returns to destroy the image. Daniel 7, the 4th beast remains until it is destroyed by Christ and the saints. Revelation 16, before Armageddon, 3 iron-like powers seek to control the nations via a clay-like deceptive message coming out of their mouths. And then Revelation 17 and 19, which we haven't looked at, but by way of summary, post-Armageddon, the nations will then yield their power to the beast and seek to fight against Christ and the saints. But then they will be completely destroyed. Okay, so the question we want to ask is, well, when will the iron dominate and the image stand on its feet? It's the same as asking, well, when will the 4th beast regain its control over the nations? Is it Armageddon? Is it before Armageddon? Or is it after Armageddon? I think the answer is a bit of both. It's increasingly the case prior to Armageddon, in the case that it's setting the stage for what's going to happen. But the main event is really after Armageddon. And I believe that's consistent. We have to view the destruction of the 4th beast that Daniel 7, talks about, as parallel with what happens in Revelation 17 and 18 to 19, when that 4th beast is finally destroyed. Okay, so with the image in Daniel 2 standing on its feet, and then that immediately before it, that stage immediately before it's struck by the stone, has to be, therefore, after Armageddon, the main event. Now, let's have a closer look at the beast and identifying the beast today. It's an empire that is extended from Daniel's 4th beast. It's Roman. It's based in Europe, but it exerts its influence globally. Now, today, the beast is separate to, but often aligned with the dragon and the false prophet. That's what Revelation 16 talks about. It just doesn't say, well, the beast. There's 3 different iron-like powers with different roles in the world we're living in today. And that's why Revelation describes it like that, using 3 symbols of the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. Now, the beast is seeking to exercise dominant control over the masses. That's what beasts do. That's what all the 4 empires did, from Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. They exercised dominant control over the masses. And the beast controls, as part of their empire, the beast, they control the issuance of money and the terms of trade. And that's important because without this ability, any religious or political leader's ability to govern is severely hamstrung if they don't have finances, if they can't finance their wars, if they've got no ability to tax the people, and control over the treasury. If they don't control the treasury, and they don't control the terms of finance, then they're not a beast. The beast really does control the issuance of money and the terms of trade. So today, let's talk about prior to the French Revolution. what was the situation in the world? Well, the kings or the emperors were in control of their money supply. They did not have to ask their bankers to provide them with funds, as they had full control over the empire, including its money supply and treasury. There were no independent central banks prior to the French Revolution. But after the French Revolution, things changed. Okay, central banks then controlled the issuance of money, separate to the kings or the governments around the world. They are independent from the government, and this remains the case today with the Reserve Bank of Australia, or whether it be the Fed in the US. They're independent. Okay, they have more influence over the globe than the power of presidents. And today, any nation cannot go to war and fund their military operations unless the banks, and more importantly, the central banks, agree. So this is, the first example or case we want to illustrate to how iron-like powers are increasing their control over the clay-like masses. And that is via their control of global banking and finance. Now, here's a famous banker's view of his own power. This is Baron Nathan Mayer de Rothschild, who you probably have heard of. He said this: I care not what puppet is placed upon the thrones of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. That the man that controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. This is what Napoleon Bonaparte said after he was defeated. He said this: when a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they and not the leaders of the government control the situation. See, the bankers, okay, not the government. Okay, if the government depends on the bankers for money, it's the bankers who control the situation, since the hand that gives is above the hand that takes. Money has no motherland. Finances are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain. So he was basically, he viewed his whole demise as due to the bankers not giving him funds. This is what Abraham Lincoln said. He said this: the government should create, issue and circulate all the currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying powers of consumers. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest, money will cease to be master and become the servant of humanity. And he's really there emulating the principles of the US Constitution, where the control of the money should be with the people, not the government, not the bankers. And from that time, there was always a big fight in the US between the bankers and those pushing, like Abraham Lincoln, that the money should be in control, okay, by the people. The issuance of money should be by the people, not by the bankers. And it's partly for this view that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. It was his struggle with the bankers. In 1913, though, the US Federal Reserve was created. And from that point on, okay, the issuance of money in the US became separated to the bankers and had nothing to do with the Constitution or the democracy in America. And Franklin Roosevelt made this comment: the real truth of this matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the large centres has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. Okay, so the bankers were back in control. Henry Ford, supports this. He said this: it is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Okay? Because it's the bankers that are in control. They can fund everything. Henry Kissinger, you might have heard of him over the years. He said this: who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. And who controls the money can control the world. Okay, well, who controls the money and who's controlling the world? Well, it's the beast in Europe. And specifically, the financial arm, the banking arm of the beast in Europe is the Bank of International Settlements located in Basel in Switzerland. This is what's called the central bank of central banks. Governments around the world, the Central Bank of Australia, the Reserve, that's who they report to, really. I mean, the politicians can express their dissatisfaction, and so the governors are replaced, but their objective continues the same. They report to the Bank of International Settlements. It's the same with the central banks all around the world. So this was created in 1930. It's the world's oldest international financial organization. And today, 63 central banks belong to the Bank of International Settlements, representing most of the world's financial market. So here's the 63 central banks that are all part of the Bank of International Settlements. It's, as it says, it's established in 1930. The Bank for International Settlements is the world's oldest international financial organisation. Uniquely, its members are central banks, not governments. Now, it's interesting down the bottom here, it says that the Central Bank of the Russian Federation was suspended in March 2022. Okay, so the Bank of International Settlements wasn't happy with what Russia was doing, invading Ukraine. So they suspended the Russian Federation from being part of this group of central banks. And so this was in the news at the time. The IMF approved the 1.4 billion in Ukraine aid, and simultaneously the BIS suspended Russia. Okay, so that meant that Russia now would always have to act on its own and separate, at least for the time being, to this system of banking. It would have to operate outside of this system of banking. And that's what it's been doing ever since. Now, the Bank of International Settlements is essentially an unelected, unaccountable central bank of the world that has complete immunity from taxation and from national laws. Even Wikipedia admits that it's not accountable to any single national government. It's an immensely powerful organisation that most people have never even heard of. I guarantee some of you, what are you talking about, Matt? I've never heard of the Bank of International Settlements, right? And that's the case. They keep a low profile, but they're controlling the world. They control all the banks throughout the world. And the history is quite checkered. It was the Bank of International Settlements was used to launder money for the Nazis during World War II. But these days, the main purpose of the BIS is to guide and direct the centrally planned global financial system. And it has far more power over how the European economy, the US economy, or any other economy for that matter will perform over the course of the next year than any politician does. Okay, if you raise interest rates, for example, that's political suicide. Okay, because the common person is going to think, oh, that's terrible. Why is why is he doing that? I'm not going to vote for him next time. But that's out of the Prime Minister's control. Okay, because interest rates going up is determined by the central bank, nothing to do with the Prime Minister. And so every 2 months, the central banks of the world gather in Basel, in Switzerland, for another global economy meeting. And during those meetings, decisions are made economically, which affect everyone, every man, woman, and child on the planet. Yet no elected politician has a say in what goes on. Now, it's interesting, there's a strong connection with the Vatican and the Bank of International Settlements. And there's a strong connection with the Rothschild family, who have been in charge of the papal treasury since 1905. This is confirmed in the Jewish Encyclopedia, which says it is a somewhat curious sequel to the attempt to set up a Catholic competitor to the Rothschilds that at the present time, 1905, The latter are the guardians of the papal treasure. So the latter, the Rothschilds in 1905, were the guardians. They were in charge of the papal treasure. Okay, so there's always been this alliance, therefore, since 1905 with the money powers, the Rothschilds, okay, and the Vatican. And exactly who has the greatest riches can be debated. Is it the Vatican or is it the Rothschilds? But it seems they're strongly interconnected. So if this is true, then the Rothschilds' control, in addition to their own fortune, is immense, including the liquid resources of the Catholic Church. Now, we often think of the Rothschilds as only associated with Britain's wealth, but the history of the family, the original founder, one of his sons remained in England, but the other 4 sons went to Europe and established the bankers all over Europe, in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Switzerland. So the modern day central banking system in Europe, okay, including the BIS, has its origins from the Rothschilds. So they're doing this. And now another point that I just mentioned in passing, what's happening from a global currency point of view is there's a push towards a digital currency. The days of the US dollar being the global reserve currency look to be heavily numbered. At some point in the near future, okay, the nations of the world are going to lose faith in the US dollar and it will collapse. But the bankers, and particularly the Bank of International Settlement, they have a plan to transition away to a new currency, and it's going to be a digital currency, and it's going to be a global currency. And so this will be the only method. They want it to be global. Okay, it's a bit like Bitcoin, but Bitcoin will be disallowed. There'll be only one online currency, and that's the global currency that they control. So that's where they're heading, and that's the direction they want to take the world of finances. Now, another aspect, how they're using their power that we want to look at, how the iron-like powers are increasing their control over the clay-like masses, is by their control of global organizations. And this is coming out of Europe as well, whether it's the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization. We'll have a look at a few examples. So since the French Revolution, which meant that the governments of the world became largely democratic, or the governments are elected to represent the will of the people, even though that's been the case, amongst this, there's always been an iron-like group of rich, powerful elite who seek to exert their control. And there's examples of well-known powerful groups that frequently meet to this end. There's been the Fabian Society since 1884, Chatham House in 1920, the Council of Foreign Relations in 1921, where the super global, basically these are organizations of the super rich who get together to try and control the world. The Bilderberg Group in 1954, and then the Club of Rome, okay, in 1968, which is heavily connected with Vatican. And then we have the European Management Forum, established in 1970, who changed its name in 1987 to the World Economic Forum. There's also the Trilateral Commission, established in 1973. And then you have all the other well-known organizations, the European Union, the UN, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, the WHO. Who pulls the strings? Who owns all these? Well, it's the central banks that we just talked about before. The super rich, okay, are influencing all of these organizations. It's the iron-like powers seeking to control the clay-like masses. And so all of these are private organizations and answer to no one but themselves. And to the world, they convey their agenda in humanitarian terms, as if they are really concerned about everyone. And so they talk about the new international economic order, the new world order. They talk about sustainable development, a circular economy, smart growth. They say we're worried about global warming and climate change, and we have to preserve the earth. And associated with this is Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030. the Great Reset and Build Back Better. But in reality, when you look at the details of their agenda, it involves the abolishment of independent sovereign nations, a one world government run by an oligarchy of the super rich, which is a fusion of banking, corporate and political leadership united by money, power and ideologies. And they're using science and technology to try and establish a perfect society. They're talking about merging of humans with science. So it's an agenda that benefits a few. It's designed to restrict the freedom, really, of the masses, and actually harms the environment, contrary to what they're saying. But in short, it's the iron seeking to obtain control over the clay, or perhaps even remove the clay from power altogether. And other names of this type of government is corporatism, an alliance of all the global corporations, mercantilism, technocracy, fascism, crony capitalism, or stakeholder capitalism. And so the structure of all the corporates in the world, it's almost like a pyramid with them all owning each other. But in simplicity, this diagram here, taken from the video Monopoly, the documentary Monopoly, which is worth watching, and I think some of you may have seen this before, shows how the ownership works. Okay, you have a lot of the major corporations all under this, but then you get to the major banks of the world and insurance companies, including Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, State Street, Morgan Stanley. But then who owns all of them? It goes up to BlackRock, and then who owns BlackRock? It goes up to a company called Vanguard. Okay, and according to Bloomberg, Vanguard and BlackRock, okay, are on track to own almost everything on Earth by 2028. That's how super rich and powerful those two companies are. Now, who owns Vanguard? Well, that's where it gets dark. Vanguard is itself, okay, in the hands of the richest families on the earth. And they're always at the top of the pyramid. They've been around for a long time, but they keep in the shadows. It's the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Bush, the DuPont, the JP Morgan. It's what we've been talking about, the founders of our banking system, okay, the UN, and the founders of most industries in the world. They never lost their power, but because of an increasing world population, they were forced to take into the shadows behind investment companies such as Vanguard. Now, I haven't got time to explain this anymore, but if you are interested, just take a look at this documentary called Monopoly, Who Owns the World? It might not be on YouTube. If you go on Rumble, it's definitely there. Now, another aspect or another organ of the beast in Europe is the World Economic Forum. And then this is a body representing all the major corporations in the world. They meet every year in Davos in Switzerland, and they invite all political leaders to attend. They plan, they coordinate together. Their objective is to ensure that the political leaders around the world are doing what they, the super rich major corporations, want. And so on their website, it reveals they're partners of the 500 top major global corporations, in addition to other partners. You might have heard they talk about the Great Reset. Okay, during the COVID pandemic, the leader of this organization, Klaus Schwab, was very prominent in saying this is a wonderful opportunity now to implement the reset of the whole world. Well, what is their reset that he's talking about? Well, it's really global governance. And if you read his book on COVID-19, The Great Reset, that's what it's all about. He's lamenting that no one is really in charge of the world, that the failure of global governance and leadership now lie exposed as never before. Okay, in other words, the world needs global governance and leadership, and he thinks our organization can do it. So he goes on, progress will only come about through improved global governance. There's no time to waste. We have to do it. We have to move ahead. Without global governance, the whole world's going to become paralyzed and we won't be able to respond to global challenges. Okay, and he's appealing to nation states must make global governance possible. In other words, yield their power, yield over their power, their sovereign power to a global elected group, a global unelected group of elites. And you might have heard of the 8 predictions for the world in 2030. We won't go through them at the moment. One of them is, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. It's a lying message of liberty, equality, fraternity, controlling the media, corporations, politicians to forward their end. If it means, yeah, you'll own nothing, but they'll own everything. And this great reset is being rolled out under the guise of the 4th industrial revolution, in which older enterprises are to be driven to bankruptcy or absorbed into monopolies, effectively shutting down huge sections of the economy. So from their point of view, the crisis of COVID-19 pandemic was an ideal tool for them to obtain domination over every aspect of the ordinary person's life and thereby enrich themselves. And so it's digital technology and artificial intelligence will be used to take control over money, energy, the production of artificial and GMO food, healthcare, real estate, policing, and how people interact with one another. Okay, in biblical terms, it's the iron attempting to gain control over the clay in a very modern and sophisticated way. And of course, God and the values, biblical values and morals is not part of this future. It's actually immoral agenda, really. And so, and I mentioned it before, but an important aspect of this is the digital identity that everyone will have to have. And together with a new global digital reserve currency that I talked about before to replace the US dollar, the idea is that they will be in control and no unauthorized person will have, the benefit is, okay, nobody may be able to have access to your personal and financial information, but if they're in control of the system, they will control you, your ability to buy and sell, receive your wages, conduct banking, access your funds, receive hospital treatment, travel across state and country borders will depend on your obedience to the system. Okay? What will you do if they demand in the future, they demand you join the army? Well, if you don't, they'll cut your funding. They won't let you access your bank. What will we do? And what will we as a body of Christadelphians do if they limit what we can publicly preach as the gospel? What will they do if they forbid us teaching our children godly principles, values and morals? And that there's only 2 sexes, there's only 2 genders, male and female as God created them. Okay, but in today's political world, you can't say that anymore. And this group is behind pushing that type of agenda. Now, you may ask, how can the WEF or the World Economic Forum exert so much power? Why would any government listen to them? Well, the first point to understand is that the World Economic Forum's members are the multinational corporations and the super rich who selectively fund political campaigns and also control the media. Okay, politicians depend on donations to fund their political cause. Okay, it's so true in the US. You have to be a billionaire independently to try and fund your own political campaign. But it's true in Australia too. You need funding, and also you need favourable press coverage. Okay, the major corporations who are all aligned with the World Economic Forum, okay, fund the press. And also there's the World Economic Forum's Global Young Global Leaders Program since 1993. So what this means is they pick out future leaders of the world and get them to come and get them into their training system. And many passing through this program then end up as prime ministers and there's many examples I could cite, but we haven't got time, and other key positions in countries throughout the whole world. So they're loyal to the WF's program. And then they get the necessary financial and media backing to become the leaders of their respective countries. So this is progressively happening throughout the whole world. And it partly explains why there was such a coordinated global response when COVID hit, with lockdowns all over the world. Let's listen to this short description of the World Economic Forum.
Joining me now is Ned Ryan, American CEO. Ned, great to see you tonight. It seems that the goal of this crowd is to kind of create the same panic about climate change that they successfully created around COVID. Do I have this wrong?
No, you have it correct. I mean, first of all, we have to accept the World Economic Forum is a fanatical political organization that uses fear and manipulation like COVID hysteria, like the hoax of global warming, to really facilitate people thinking that somehow they're the saviors, but really all you're doing is helping them accomplish their goal, which really is a global public-private fascist movement and fusion of big government, big tech, big money to create a technocratic ruling elite, which conveniently is them. And really, Laura, if you want to look at it a different way, too, with the World Economic Forum, they want to create feudalism 2.0, in which we are serfs and they are the lords ruling over us. You'll have nothing and be happy is one of the things that comes out of Davos. That's what they're aiming for. They're aiming for feudalism in which we are serfs and we should be happy that they are ruling over us.
Joining me now is Ned Ryan.
Okay, and now parallel with this is the United Nations, okay, another organ of, I think, of the beast, with its sustainable development goals. Okay, you might have heard of these, and many of these are being implemented across our country and throughout our corporations, and many of these sound nice in theory and paint a picture of an emergent global utopia, such as no poverty, no world hunger, reduced inequality. Yet the reality behind most, if not all, of these sustainable development goals is that they will only benefit the economic elite and entrench their power. And that can be clearly seen if you take the time to read the fine print of these sustainable development goals. I'll just summarize again. And so this coming out of the UN, it's consistent with what the World Economic Forum is saying. It's a lying, deceptive message of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Okay, and they're controlling the media, the corporations, and the politicians to forward this agenda. Here's one reporter who says this: simply put, the sustainable development supplants decision making at the national and local level with global governance. That's what it's all about. Okay, so it's yielding control, okay, to iron-like powers. But more than this, it's a system for global control. Those of us who live in developed nations will have our behavior changed as a psychological and economic war is waged against us to force our compliance. As openly stated by the UN, sustainable development is all about transformation, not necessarily sustainability, as most people conceive of it. It aims to transform the earth and everything on it, including us, into commodities, the trading of which will form the basis of a new global economy. Though it is being sold to us as sustainable, the only thing this new global financial system will sustain is the power of a predatory financial elite. Now they're aiming to have these goals all implemented by 2030. Okay, so sometimes it's called Agenda 21, sometimes it's called Agenda 2030, and that's interesting, isn't it? I was only discussing with someone weekly, what the year 2030 could mean, being that it will be approximately 2,000 years, okay, since the resurrection of Jesus Christ, roughly. Okay, so that's going to be between now and 2030, we haven't got much time left. These guys are trying to rule the world. Okay, we know Christ is going to intervene to stop them, but their agenda is to do this by 2030. Okay, let's listen to this commentator who tells us what the real agenda is.
Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development. It is the inventory and control plan. Inventory and control of all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all food, all energy, all information, and all human beings in the world. And this is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations back in 1992. It's a United Nations plan. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. And so many of us around the world think that sustainable development, it just sounds so great. Isn't it about recycling and creative reuse and creating energy and food resources for everyone? And the answer is no, it really is not. It's about moving populations into city centers, concentrated city centers, and clearing them out of the rural areas. It's constructed of non-governmental organizations, corporations, and government in order to dictate and regulate what it is that happens around the world. Regionalization is the stepping stone to globalization, and globalization is the standardization of all systems. All systems have to be brought into harmony in order to control them all. And the goal of Agenda 21 is one world government and total control from a central unit. The principles are public-private partnerships, which is fascism. And this is how it's implemented on the ground, is through this joining together between corporations, non-governmental organizations, and governments in order to cut out the actual individual, your voter, and instead to take that to a level where we literally cannot penetrate. This is a corporatocracy. It's a totalitarian state being developed right now all over the world while we are moving towards the end game. We are not there. And this is the opportunity that all of us have now to stand. Nations.
So the Agenda 2030, or the Great Reset, to summarize it in plain terms, it means a global reset of all debt, elimination of cash, one digital currency. Digital identities, passports will be necessary for anything. You won't own anything more. You'll just rent your house or car. There'll be a universal basic income given to everyone, but you've got to comply with all the requirements. Otherwise, you won't get your monthly universal basic income. It's the fourth industrial revolution, big tech, robots, AI will replace many jobs. Okay, a lot of jobs will become useless. That's why people who are unemployed will get this universal basic income to survive on. There'll be the rationing of food and energy. And you're seeing that already. They're trying to say cows are polluting the planet and anti-being beef and stop eating meat, which is a ridiculous part of their agenda as well. There'll be mandatory health and medical requirements, ban on any alternatives, controlled fertility, reproduction, which is really a depopulation agenda, and gender equality, pushing it, fluidity, family values no more. You're just a number. Okay, and this is all a deceptive plan by the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet to exert their power over the clay-like masses. Now, next month, something's very important is happening at the World Health Organization, and what it's called is they're planning an international pandemic treaty, where all of the members of the World Health Organization, I think there's 194 global, most countries around the world are part of the World Health Organization, including Australia, are going to agree on certain things where they will yield their control under emergency situations, okay, to the World Health Organization. And there's a lot of resistance going on, and it's a big question. It's going to be signed. Who's going to sign to this agreement and give up their power to the World Health Organization? The head of the chief of the World Health Organization is currently appealing for countries to sign up, because he's portraying it as you'll miss out on this. It'll be a blow for future generations if you don't do this. But as he says, it's a legally binding treaty on fighting pandemics. Now, so this is something to watch next month. Okay, 194 WHO member countries could yield up their sovereignty in key areas, okay, to the World Health Organization. And I've got a video. We'll only watch a bit of this because we're out of time. But just to explain what's involved here, listen to this.
The World Health Organization has been discussing a new pandemic treaty, as well as amendments to the international health regulations. What is the real significance of these? What would they look like in America if they were passed? And how is it that a treaty could supersede the U.S. Constitution? This could be one of the most important topics of our time. Welcome to Fallout.
So there's been a lot of discussion about this new WHO treaty and international health regulations. We've heard everything from these are just guidelines purely to be picked up by member states as they wish, all the way to these things will encroach dramatically on national sovereignty and kind of everything in between. So let's break this down for people.
What I've heard from a number of lawyers, including testimony during the recent Ron Johnson hearings, if you actually look at the language that's being deployed here, they're removing the language that talks about these being optional. And it appears that there is an intent to make these obligatory requirements. And in so doing, that would directly infringe on the sovereign rights of individual nation states, including the United States, to manage their own health care.
And so before we...
All right, Dr. Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Honored to be here.
All right. So to start with, could you give an outline to the viewers who might not be aware of it, what this WHO international treaty that's currently being ironed out over at the UN, what is it all about?
Well, the key points are that with the support of the financial institutions of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and the Gates Foundation, we're essentially ceding the ability to suspend all civil liberties and all of the rights associated with what we would call the Bill of Rights here in the United States, International Declaration of Human Rights. All of those can be suspended by a capricious determination that there's a public health emergency, and the minute that happens, there are no rights. In a nutshell, that's what the treaty is. And like the PrEP Act was after the anthrax outbreak of 2001, which the U.S. perpetrated on the U.S. so that we could get to the PrEP Act of 2005, the exact same playbook is how we got COVID to get us to this moment, which is to say, terrorize the world, convince them that we need some giant protector state that actually has some sort of supranational ability, and then suspend civil liberties as long as they need to be suspended. And in this particular case, at the whim of funding agencies who have no criminal accountability. And what it does is it allows a board at the World Health Organization to either declare an actual emergency or declare an anticipated emergency. There doesn't have to be any evidence. There is no evidence standard at all. So this is actually worse than what happened in COVID, because they don't even have a standard that says they have to isolate a pathogen. They don't have to isolate anything. What they have to do is simply say, we think that there is a reason to declare an emergency, and as such, we to suspend travel, to actually penalize member states. There's a very big clause inside of the treaty that actually has penalties on member states for noncompliance. So yes, the Tedros official statement is, oh, no, everybody still has their sovereignty. Kind of like New York had sovereignty during the pandemic. So if you feel good about how New York treated everybody during the pandemic, then you're probably safe.
We're undergoing a soft coup, and the idea is to create a whole new set of laws and ignore the existing human rights laws and other laws under the pretext of pandemic preparedness and the biosecurity agenda. The WHO is developing through all its nations, but with the WHO Directorate in the United States in charge, a pandemic treaty and amendments to the existing international health regulations that will remove the human rights protections currently embedded in the IHRs, will enforce surveillance, censorship, get rid of freedom of speech, require governments to censor and only push a single narrative. Other things that the amendments do is to bind the states so they're no longer recommendations but enforceable edicts, provide a liability shield, get rid of intellectual property rights, move supplies from one country to another, enforce digital passports, and the Director General of WHO can demand that a pandemic or a potential pandemic exists. He can just declare it with no standards, and then countries around the world will have to obey. One Health is another part of this. One Health is a concept that was created to enable the WHO, with these documents, to take over jurisdiction of everything in the world by saying that climate change, animals, plants, water systems, ecosystems are all central to health.
Let's just talk about what these...
Okay, I'll leave it there on that video. But see, so that should be May 2024. So it's next on the title of this slide. It's next month that all of the nations around the world are either going to sign up their agreement to yield over this sovereignty, their sovereignty, if the WHO declares an emergency based on its own estimation or thinks there's going to be an emergency, then national laws will be suspended and everyone has to follow what the WHO says. Okay, so that's clearly part of the process here, okay, that we'd expect biblically towards the time of the end, where the iron increases its power, okay, its sovereign power over the clay-like nations. So this will be interesting. From all intents, it looks like even Australia will sign up to this, but we'll see what happens next month. Now, we are out of time. I was going to go, my third aspect was to illustrate to you by their control of the media as well. But in simplicity, okay, these major corporations who are all connected with the World Economic Forum, okay, control the news, control the media. And so we have to be aware of that. And they also control the major technology companies like Google. Okay, so you have to be aware of that when watching the media or using the media. And even when using AI or chat GPT, okay, it's only garbage in, garbage out, right? So the answer you're going to get isn't according to what on gender equality or things like that, right? Is only what they want you to receive. So we must be very aware of that and awake and alert as Bible students. And we've really got to focus on letting our minds be influenced by the Word of God, okay, rather than what's in the media. Okay, let's conclude. You know, all of this, of course, is going to be their Great Reset, and Agenda 2030 is going to be brought to an end when Christ returns. What's interesting in Revelation 16 is that there's Revelation 16, okay, portrays that doesn't the effect of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, and the deceptive message coming out of their mouths actually works to gather all the nations together to battle in Armageddon. So there's no lasting union. There might be an attempt to get union, but clearly there's two groups of nations, okay, that all the Revelation prophecies, all the Armageddon prophecies detail. There's two different groups of nations with two very different agendas. But nevertheless, the financial, technological and legal infrastructure that will enable them to obtain control, particularly out of Europe, post-Armageddon, we can see is now being put in place. And so Revelation 17 and 18, post-Armageddon, yes, then the nations will unite and yield their power to the beast completely to rebel against Christ. And so this is when Daniel's image, the gold, the silver, the brass, and the iron, will be standing on its feet. And the beast and the false prophet, Babylon the Great, will be successful in causing the nations to yield total control to them at that point, even though Jesus Christ has returned. Okay, but at that point they will portray him as the Antichrist. But we know that Jesus Christ and the saints will then finally destroy this system. It's as it says in Revelation 17, verse 14, they will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. So the chosen and faithful are with Jesus Christ. That's us as true believers, as immortalized saints. We will be with Christ at that juncture, obviously. So I want to make a point in conclusion that we have to have strong faith, because if our faith fails, then fear flourishes. And this is the lesson from Mark chapter 4, when Jesus calmed the storm. He arose, he rebuked the wind and said unto the sea, peace be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, why are you so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? Now Christ upbraided them in that situation. Okay, that was quite a scary and horrifying situation for them. They were overcome with fear. But Christ provided the antidote. He said, faith. You've got to have faith in a fearful situation. And that's a question that Christ asks in Luke 18. He says, when the Son of Man comes, shall he find the faith on the earth, a strong faith that believes no matter what, Jesus is returning, no matter what happens in my life now, okay, the kingdom is going to be here, okay, and that's my hope. I want to be there. I will be there when Jesus returns, no matter what happens to me now. But the implied message is that there will be little or no such faith when Christ returns. And there's likely to be a pandemic of fear prior to his coming. So a strong faith is required to prevent ourselves by being overwhelmed by the media-induced fear. Now, we're not immune to a virus of fear, but we should have a very different perspective of things. We are the ambassadors of Christ. We're energized by the hope living within us. And so rather than the diabolical media, our hearts should be filled and guided by the word of his grace, which is able to build us up and to give us an inheritance among all them which is sanctified.